why do you think? Well, why do you think I'm not? We had a good indication today of self-hating Jews in the paper today. The kind of Jews that Pinsker is talking about and Herzl is trying to escape from, and so on and so forth. These are actually Israelis themselves. What did they do today that was so amazingly stupid and mind-bogglingly self-destructive? You guys don't read the papers, you're lucky. I won't tell you that. No, but this Peace Now movement in Israel that's been around for 10 or 20 years and always wants to have peace, but there's no one obviously extending the hand of peace to them, but they think that as long as they cry peace, someone will shake their hand or something, or like them better or whatever. Came out today with an analysis of the so-called settlements. These are not settlements, these are actual towns and things that people have worked hard to build up. But so-called settlements that they're built, 40% of them supposedly, according to their documents, are built on, private Arab land. And I know for a fact that that is a total lie, because I know how Islamic law works. And then now all the papers have picked that up. So what they do is they undermine their own situation, make people think they're stealing things from the Arabs or this sort of thing. It's really shocking. It's just out of total ignorance that people like that do these. Where they got the documents from, I don't know, but it's splattered across them, most of the newspapers as, not a lead story, but one of the interesting stories of the day. That really makes me angry, because I know where these settlements are, and I've seen them with my settlements, little towns. I've seen them with my own eyes, and they're on rocky, barren, nowhere places. There's no, there is no cultivated Arab land almost anywhere near any of them. Hilltops and in stretches of barren rock that they have revived and so on, and they haven't taken anybody's private land for the most part that I can see anywhere. All the ones I've seen have been built out in nowhere, in the boondocks, as it said, that no one's ever touched. And how do I know that that is not private land? Because I know Islamic law. Islamic law, I've written a book on it, Islamic law in Palestine and Israel. I used to sell it down in the bookstore. I even actually have an article here that I wrote some years ago that I found in my office. Young Turk legislation, 1913 to 17, its application in Palestine, Israel. This primarily deals with land law, Ottoman land law, and Islamic land law, which was based on Islamic land law. In Islamic land law, there are three kinds of land. There's mulk, which is private property. There's matruki, which is sort of land that's used by villages in a common manner for grazing or something like that. And then there's mewat, which is called dead lands. That's the word for death in Arabic and Hebrew. Dead lands are outside of towns and villages and are owned by nobody, sort of like the American used to be in the West, unless someone revives them, builds a fence, and cultivates them for 3 years. Then you can actually own that land in a private state of ownership. But almost all the lands we're talking about are dead lands, mewat lands, lands that no one has cultivated and no one owns. And so I know that these lands where these things have been built are almost, I don't say universally 100%, but almost completely built on these mewat lands. And mewat belongs to the person who revives them. And that's, even in Islamic law, that is the case. If you enclose it and you cultivate it for 3 straight years, we used to have that out in the territories of the United States, out in Oklahoma and places. If you enclose it, I don't know how long you have to cultivate it, but you then possessed it. But that's just nonsense, that report. And that's the kind of thing to contribute. Then when Baker and these other people will present their analysis of the political situation of the Middle East, we'll hear that all the problems have to do with the Israel-Arab problem. If we didn't have the Israel-Arab problem, Israel-Palestine problem, we wouldn't have any problems. That's what we're going to hear. And all these people play into that mindset. And of course, the problems in the Middle East have almost nothing to do with the Israel-Palestine situation, because most Arabs couldn't give a fig about the Palestinians and never did. And it has to do with lots of other things, like the Israel-Palestine problem is causing Shiites and Sunnis to murder each other, you know, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But that's what you're going to hear in the coming months. And these people, so I'm supposed to be in a really furious, not furious state, but frustrated state. So my daughter said, why don't you write something about it? I said, well, look, I'm not a political person. I can sound off, but I'm not interested. I have enough on my plate with the things that I work on. So I'm in a bad mood, but it relates to what we're doing here. And it relates to self-hatred, people who think they're going to get loved by acting as if they're, you know, the first ones to immolate themselves on their own poignard, as it were. Okay, the Jewish state, page 204. The idea which I have developed is this pamphlet is an ancient one. It's the restoration of the Jewish state. So some will call it utopian, as he said, and we did last time on the next page. But the decisive factor, as he says, is our propelling force. So now we're in the high point of Zionist thought here. Judenstaat. This is what will be known as political Zionism. And the reason it's going to be called political Zionism is because Herzl believes that you must lay the political groundwork properly before you endanger people with a harebrained utopian scheme. Anyway, he feels that the propelling force is going to be the situation or plight or negative the negative world in which the Jews find themselves. And who would deny that that exists? And he's talking about 1900 or 1896, after the Dreyfus trial, which we discussed to some extent already. I could read you that piece on Dreyfus's sojourn in Devil's Island in the Modern Jewish History Reader, but we've already looked at it, and you can look at it in more detail yourself. Anyway, so we should discuss it fully in the chapter on the causes of anti-Semitism. The current Zionist projects, not the ones he's talking about, the ones he's envisioning, not the ones he's envisioning, but the ones that preceded him. For instance, the Hibat Zion movement is what he's talking about. The current Zionist project and other associations to check anti-Semitism are nothing more than tea kettles in this situation. You know, he says that the situation is so overwhelming, vast, frightening, explosive, immense, that these things are just like Band-Aids, if you want to call it that. And what has propelled him to this insight, where he's a total secular person, never seems to have thought about such things previously? I guess he was so frightened by what he saw in the Dreyfus trial in Paris when he went to cover it as the correspondent for the principal Vienna newspapers, that it just like had a, what is it when you suddenly get struck by, it had a, traumatic effect on it. Traumatic effect.
Epiphany. That would mean epiphany.
Epiphany is too elegant Joycean, I think, for this. He has an epiphany, okay, but epiphany isn't new. But what is, I think he has undergone a huge trauma, and the epiphany or the insight that he gets here is as a result of that. But okay, epiphany if you prefer, but I think it's a traumatic epiphany. It's like, oh my God, he suddenly sees what is coming. And this is Paris, not Germany. Anyway, he says, look, the situation, the force, you know, is such to propel, no, what is the force that would solve this problem and get away from this, what he considers to be an horrendous situation, regardless of the efforts of Mendelssohn's and Reform Jews and conservative Jews and whatever, to conform, assimilate in the previous century? What would propel a large engine to move passengers and goods? I'm profoundly convinced that I am right, though I doubt whether I shall live to see myself proved. So, that's all very prescient. You know what the word prescient means? Insightful, foresight, prophetical, if you want. He sees clearly the future. He knows what's coming. That's what's so amazing. The others don't seem to understand what is involved. And I think the reason, as I keep trying to intimate to you guys, is that they're not out in the big world. They don't know the big world. They're still stuck in these communities on the periphery, in ghettos and things. But Herzl is in the middle of the, cultured, civilized world of Europe. Somehow you say, how did that happen? I went to the university and he became totally secularized and he was propelled forward into this bigger world. And sometimes when you're in this bigger world, you can see things more clearly. But also the insight he has, he doesn't think he'll live to see him proven correct. And that's right too. He doesn't live to see himself proven correct. In fact, he will die about 7 years after what we're reading here at a very young age. Which is, again, he has this sense of doom. He's overwhelmed, I think, with a sense of doom. Now, that's why the detractors that we'll read presently, you'll see I am prejudiced. I admit it, annoy me so much because they don't understand how they drove this man to some extent to his death, and how they underestimated him, and how they, allowed their petty, even envious situations to not only obscure their view of him, but to bring him down, if you want, which I think is very sad. Not that he could have succeeded perhaps any more than he did, but I think it was a shame that he couldn't have lived out a full life. Those who today inaugurate this movement are unlikely to live to see its glorious culmination. Again, he's so clear-sighted. He sees it so clearly. But the very inauguration is enough to inspire in them a high pride and the joy of inner liberation of their existence. So there he becomes upbeat. It's like he swings back and forth from pessimism to optimism. That's why I'm reading it to you, because you get an idea of his character. Look, I don't want this to be considered utopianism. Utopianism means just, an ideal dream situation. The scoffers will caricature my sketch in this way, and of course that's what they do. So he's very sophisticated, he understands the world he's living in, but the very inauguration is enough to inspire a high pride. Oh no, I said that. Will caricature my sketch and attempt to vitiate the whole idea. And that's what he says is going to happen to him, which is true to some extent. Someone who I explained my plan to said, it's the hallmark of utopia is to present facets of the future as facts in present reality. In other words, giving him a little bit of a jab, if you want. And he replies, no, that's not true. Finance ministers in every country present the facts of the future for their budget as if it's a reality. It isn't just because you're thinking of the future doesn't mean that it's a utopia. Still, I expect more of my readers, middle of the page. I ask the cultivated men whom I address to set aside these preconceptions. I shall even go so far as to ask those Jews who have most earnestly tried to solve the Jewish question to look on their previous attempts as mistaken, impractical. It's quite arrogant, if you want. I don't see why the previous ones aren't as good as the one he's going to suggest, since his doesn't seem to me to be that different, just perhaps a little more practical and sophisticated at the same time. Anyway, I'm not building castles in the air. I state clearly and emphatically that I believe in the achievement of the idea. Though I do not profess to have discovered its shape it may ultimately take, the world needs the Jewish state, and it will arise. This is just a definitive thing. This is different than any of the previous writers. He is thoroughly, epiphany if you want, absorbed by his vision. You know, he's like obsessed, compelled, overwhelmed. It will be. So he is. You have to see a prophetic streak in this person. It's not just a normal person anymore. And I think that's how he appeared to the Jews. So if you're a Christian in the room and you've never heard of these people, most Jews haven't heard of them either, so I wouldn't feel that you're in any different state than most people. And they certainly don't know what Theodore Herzl did, or what he represented, or how he was different, or what his ideas achieved. You can see by reading this that you're dealing with an extraordinary individual. The others were interesting too, but now you've moved on to the plane of something, fairly extraordinary. Even the first sentences show that. And I don't know why, but it's true. I think it's true. The plan would seem mad enough if a single individual were to undertake it, but if many Jews simultaneously agree on it, it's entirely reasonable. Its achievement presents no difficulties worthy of the mention. The idea depends only on the number of the adherents. It's very practical, you see, there's no problem here. Perhaps our ambitious young men, to whom every road of advancement, in Europe that is now closed, and for whom the Jewish state throws open a bright prospect of freedom, happiness, and honor, perhaps they will see to it that this idea is spread. Now that's another point. He's a European. He's brought up in Europe. He speaks about honor. And I don't mean honor, a little honor, H-O-N-R. I mean, really, he's talking here about H-O-N-O-U-R, if you like better. Honor in the sense of the English spell it that way. Honor in the sense of pride. Honor in the sense of something to die for. Honor in the sense of that you shall not, insult my honor. Not that I'm an honest person, like I'm honest Abe or something like that. My honor is something that I will live and die for. The honor of my name, the honor of my family, the honor of my being, the honor of my word, the honor of myself. He brings that in, you see. And he says the young men will perhaps see it better than older people. They haven't been beat down so much. They're more romantic, probably. And just the publication of this pamphlet, for him, as he says, is enough. Again, this is, I read to you because you could say it's an extraordinary introduction. Well, to say it's an extraordinary introduction is not the same as reading what the introduction is. Oh, hello everyone, this is an extraordinary introduction. No, what is extraordinary about it? Reading it together allows us to see what is interesting. If you don't think it's extraordinary, that's a personal opinion that you're certainly well entitled to. But you can judge by this what you think. Now, I think, you see, he says, every road of advancement is closed. Yes, all these Jews have a closed state of advancement, so what do? They all convert to Christianity so they can move forward. We've seen that throughout the whole century now. So there are some people whose honor does not allow them to do that. And a Christian evangelical person will say, well, why not? What's your problem? Well, the problem is that too many people have died over too many centuries just to throw in the towel like that because I feel like advancing in my own personal life. That's what the problem is. And that's a matter of what? Honor. That's a matter of honor. And Mendelssohn says basically the same thing. Even if I were to agree with the superiority of your religion, or I would not convert. It's too much water over the dam, if you like. You say, don't you see the beauty of this thing, and so on and so forth? Perhaps so, but the thing has gone too far. And it would be dishonorable to try to escape in such a manner, So he brings in the word of honor, and I think that is really different. None of the previous ones spoke about honor, I don't think. And I don't think Israelis today speak much about honor, though some behave honorably in the sense of not honestly, but honor in the sense of dignity. And dignity is a big part of what Herzl has, dignity. Okay. So now I'm not going to write again after I write this thing, unless the attacks of my opponents force me. I sometimes feel that way, as you know, in my field. I always say I'm not going to do this, and then I get attacked, so I feel I have to respond, and so on and so forth. So I know a lot personally about how he feels going against a flood of opponents who he perhaps considers mediocre and who frankly I consider rather mediocre. They can consider me mediocre, but I've been to a conference this weekend in Washington, D.C. of my confreres and peers, and really what passes for scholarship that I had to sit and listen to was such a mediocre level. The sense of history, the scope of insight into the broad sweep of what's going on in the world at that time is so restricted and childish, really, that it's actually an insult to sometimes sit in the sessions that they conduct and what passes for serious work at places like Harvard and other colleges of that kind. Really, I feel it's an indignity sometimes to even sit and listen to what their discussions are. It's on such a low, insightful level. All they do is talk about, a word or something like that, and they have no idea of the broader sweep or even information. If you asked any of them what Islam was, they wouldn't know. Most of the Jewish people in these sessions have no idea what Christianity is. Never read all the documents, never read all the church fathers. I mean, their knowledge is like paper thin. Most of the Christians never read Talmudic material, never read Islamic material. And it's really depressing to see people taking part as experts in the world, referring to them as experts, to see the really rather unsophisticated level of their background and mindset. So I think that's how he feels to some extent, and so I personally feel that I can identify. Not that I'm trying to pump myself up in that regard, but I just feel I know what he's talking about. He says, "Is what I'm saying not yet true? Am I ahead of my time? Are the suffering of the Jews not yet acute enough? We'll see." And he puts it very nicely there. The Jews haven't suffered enough? In a way, he's saying, don't worry, it'll get worse. It's coming, and they will have suffered enough. My regret, and the world's regret, and I think most people of goodwill's regret, is in fact they were not able to understand what their suffering was. And of course now we see the situation today where, constant pounding, not only on the ground in the Middle East, but in the newspapers, in the press, and everywhere. It's really, as I've said, quite shocking that this would still be going on like this. And nobody, as I said last time, questions 22 or so Arab countries, and one Jewish country has to be questioned. What, you don't have enough with 22 countries? You want 23? And the world seems to think that that's in some way appropriate after what we've witnessed and contributions that the Jews have given the world in so many fields over such a long period of time. It's really quite astonishing to me. And the most liberal people are the worst on this issue. The most left-wing, socialist, all these people, they're just astonishing in their attitudes. So in the end, the people that, Israel tends to fall back on in our time are conservatives or right-wing people who would have been the people who would have been against the Jews in the old days. So it's a sad commentary on the present situation we see. So the only sadness that I think we have here in what he's talking about is that, yeah, the situation got acute enough, but they were not in a position to actually save the numbers that he wanted to save. There are numbers that have been saved. There are now 5 million Jews in Israel. That's quite an achievement. But on the other hand, I guess the driving force ultimately turned out to be a Hitler. The driving force got acute enough, but not before no one imagined that they were going to also exterminate 6 million. That's what's so, it's hard for people to come to grips with it. So we have to have people go around and try to deny that it exists. So what, they say it's 5.5 million, you mean? It's probably 6 million. It could even be more. I wouldn't be surprised. It's really something astonishing. And I'm sorry to keep back on that theme, but when you read Herzl, you feel the pathos of it. It depends on the Jews themselves whether this political document remains for the present just a romance. if this generation is too dull, you see, too unimaginative, I feel that often in the work that I do, to understand these documents that I've been privileged to work on, people are too dull to understand the implications of them and to reduce them to a tiresome bore. Then to understand it rightly, a future, finer, more advanced generation will arise to comprehend it. Oh, I hope he's right. And to some extent, maybe he is. The Jews who try shall achieve their state, and they will deserve it. In other words, if you act, if you work for it, you will achieve it. There's nothing standing in your way. And they will deserve it. Yeah, now we're in a pessimistic mode only because of the nuclear threat we now are witnessing in the world. That is really, we've said, quite shocking. Okay, so that's his introduction, quite an introduction, and he's quite sure, you see, if the Jews try, they will achieve it. Let's see. Are we going to be like Rip Van Winkle, he says in the next section, you know, slumbering, waking from this slumber. Anyway, without enterprise, labor remains static, so we must be enterprising, he says. When he talks about fields of endeavor being closed to most Jews, he will go on to propose that, you know, the Jews in his time, and I think our own, frankly, this hasn't ended. In my experience, it hasn't ended anyway. Maybe you don't have enough experience of that to understand. We produce a huge number of what he considers to be mediocre intellectuals. You know, the Jews also maybe compared to some people's produce first-rate intellectuals, but he thinks there's a lot of mediocre intellectuals too. We can take this class where everything is closed to them in their advancement and put them to some work, you know, like today you can put mediocre intellectuals to work in the Silicon Valleys of the world, you know. There's all kinds of outlets for what one might call mediocre intellectuals. You know, people use their mind but may not be like Einstein or something like that. But he said that for him, we will be able to put them to work as the bureaucracy of the new state. You know, see, bureaucracies were always considered to be sort of intellectual level people. So he wants to put these people to work so they're not, they aren't frustrated, so they don't actually bring harm on the people by joining all these other movements that bring harm, like he would, I'm sure, include the Jews who make up most of the socialist movements and so on. And, you know, why the Jews are out to liberate the working men of Europe is something you really have to ask. I mean, you know, let the working men of Europe liberate themselves. You know, what's the Jews got to do with it? And in fact, they're the ones going to get blamed for everything anyway, which is what happened in Europe, both in Germany and in Russia. And it's still going on in Russia now. Still going on in Russia. All the Jewish enterprise entrepreneurs are all being arrested, thrown into prison, killed, exiled, put out to Siberia, false trials going on and stuff like that. You know, it just, that goes on endlessly because they're the ones who are enterprising after the fall of communism and so on. So the secret police have taken over again in Russia, and now we have a secret police state. I hope you follow the news enough to know how they poisoned this person in London a couple of days ago. You follow that? Yeah, they poisoned this guy in London, like they, up to their old tricks. Back in the 80s, they were hitting people with poison umbrellas, you know, who were dissidents. This guy was a person who worked with Putin in the secret intelligence. That's where Putin came out of, the NKVD or the, whatever it was called. Keeps changing its name, and he was a colonel like Putin, and he defected. And then he revealed some of the secrets of the workings of the intelligence. Okay, there will be people who don't like him. But more recently, he's been writing articles overseas against the situation in Russia. And then when this woman journalist was killed outside of her apartment, in the hallway of her apartment building a couple of weeks back, he was getting the documents to show who was behind that. And he met someone for dinner or lunch or whatever in London. And again, one of these, someone slipped him a poison pellet of some kind that seemed to have been laced with radioactivity. And the guy's hovering between life and death now in London hospital. His organs are almost destroyed, and basically is getting bone marrow cancer. What is this on the floor? Do you know? Huh?
It's lit from my jacket.
God,
But I'm
don't put any more down there. He's floating around. I thought you had a dead
I'm sorry.
animal.
I was listening to you the whole time though. I was just, it's
Don't
bad habit.
pick that one up too, will you? Because it's floating around. I don't want to, it's beginning to blow all over the place. Like, what is that, a dead animal? Okay, so what we're saying is that, the Russians are back to their old tricks again, and the Jews mostly are the ones that are being blamed for things in whatever is happening there in Russia and so on. So he wanted to take these people who were, the Trotskys of the world, the Marxes of the world, all these people who, were tell the working men to throw off their chains and unite and all, so on and so forth, which is a noble idea. I have nothing against it. But the Stalins take it over in the end and then blame the Jewish participants as not being real members of the proletariat or the people, and then take vengeance. Stalin, as you know, followed Trotsky all the way to Mexico and had him killed with a pickaxe in an apartment in Mexico. I guess you don't know these things, all of you, but that's what happens in these struggles. The native-born secret policeman, who Stalin was originally a secret policeman, always triumph in those environments. And so what Herzl's saying, look, let's give you guys something useful to do. You're frustrated. Okay, we understand how frustrated you are. You're mediocre intellectuals. So he's going to put them to work building something positive. It's true we need workmen to set our machinery in motion. But you see, we have manpower enough, too much in fact. Well, in those days perhaps, not now. Only those who are ignorant of the condition of the Jews in many countries of Eastern Europe would dare assert the Jews are unfit or unwilling to perform manual labor. We've got laborers, they're ready to go to work. They're not all pseudo-intellectuals. We have the shtetls in the farming areas in the path of settlement. Okay, but in this pamphlet, I'm not defending them. That would be useless. I believe that that man is steadily advancing to a higher ethical level. Oh my, there he is, perhaps misguided. He thinks we're getting more ethical as time goes on. But I see this ascent as painfully slow. Yeah, but you see, he does understand that destiny is changing at the end of that paragraph. And like I've said, these things arose when the technical means were up to it. And he understands that the technical achievements of our century, means the 19th century, have brought about a remarkable renaissance or situation that could really benefit humanity. Distance has ceased to be an obstacle. That's the big thing. And of course, in our day, it's even accelerated almost by light years, like you go into space when they have these science fiction movies and they suddenly go to light speed in Return of the Jedi or something like that, where you warp or go, it's in our time, it's accelerating probably too fast, which is why as these winds of technological change sweep over the little earth that we know, all the germs of past unsophisticated medical thinking sweep across with them. So we get new cancers and germs that attack the very institutions that produce these things. And I think to some extent that's what's happening. These countries are going to take, a lot of them, 300 or 400 years to move to a situation where the institutions in the countries develop sufficiently to support a real human rights, civil rights, democratic type society. You have to have guarantees, you have to have law courts that are honest, you have to have people who are willing to pay attention to constitutions, you have to have all this sort of thing occur. And what's happened is that this has not occurred in large parts of the world, and yet the technological advances are open to all of these different groups where it has not occurred. So I just went through going to Washington, D.C. and back, airport security situations, which were unknown 20 years ago, as you know. And it is frightening to see what people have to do now to get on an airplane. It really is a sad commentary. I mean, okay, the technology is rising to the point that they may be able to frustrate bombers who want to destroy the airplanes. But there you are, you know, there is an example of the germ or the virus that it comes along with like the computer virus, comes along sweeping into the modern world. So our technology may have accelerated too much. Anyway, his day it hadn't gone that far. He's talking about steamboats that can transport large numbers of people, but they can't do it in, like, you know, 5 hours from LA to New York or something. It's going to take them, like, you know, to go around the Horn, it was like 3 months. To go across the Panama Canal was like, you know, 6 weeks or 2 months or whatever. It was not, even the best steamboat voyages to Europe would take a week or 2. So it was not like we have. Communications, telegraph, that was instantaneous, more or less, as long as they laid the wires. And so on. So things were moving, but not like at jet speed or light speed as we have now. So he knows that it's possible. Things that were not possible then are possible now. Distance is no longer an obstacle. Our great steamships carry us swiftly and surely over hitherto uncharted seas. Look how optimistic he is, even though he's pessimistic. Our railways carry us safely into a mountain world, hitherto curiously, cautiously scaled only by foot. Events occurring in countries undiscovered when Europe first confined Jews in ghettos are known to us in a matter of an hour. And I think he's talking about the blood libel in Damascus, things like that. We know instantly when these things happen. That's why the plight of the Jews is an anachronism. In other words, it's a thing out of the past. We don't have to remain in that plight. Nor because over 100 years ago there was a period of enlightenment, the Haskalah, Mendelssohn, and so on, which in reality affected only the most elevated spirits. You know, the Enlightenment didn't really get down to the mass level. Okay, we have the electric light. So a few snobs, he says, the drawing rooms are illuminated. But, you know, we have to solve a larger thing. And of course, he's dated in that regard. So the Jewish question is one of the problems that has to be solved. And he puts it there, and unfortunately, Hitler too knows about that in due course. And when we solve it, and he never could have imagined the solution that was in store, I guess, although maybe he could have. But we're doing it not only for ourselves, but for many other downtrodden and oppressed being peoples. It exists, the Jewish question. It would be foolish to deny it. It's a misplaced piece of medievalism, which civilized nations do not yet seem able to shake off. Is that all it is? A misplaced bit of medievalism? Medievalism, if you prefer? I think he underestimates the roots of it, actually. He thinks it's just a matter of, I think, again, I have to emphasize the theological roots because I'm in a theological department, as it were. That may be good or bad. I may be wrong there. But I feel that people like him, as impressive as they are in their activism, don't, as Pinsker, don't understand the roots, how deep the problem to some extent is, and that's why it's still with us. It still comes back. They proved that they had this high-minded desire when they emancipated us. Now he's speaking of the enlightened governments in Europe in the 19th century and late 18th century. But where there are a large number of Jews, meaning in Poland and in Russia and even in France where he's encountered it, the problem persists. And if it didn't exist, Jewish immigrants would bring it, like to America, to the Lower East Side. We are naturally drawn to places where we are not persecuted, and our appearance there gives rise to the persecution. So, he may be talking about places like England or America. This will inevitably be so. France, he cites here. In highly civilized countries like France, so long as the Jewish question is not solved on the political level. And he said it before, or it was Pinsker who said it before. I think Pinsker in Emancipation said it before him, Auto Emancipation, they only deal with individual Jews. They don't deal with the Jews as a nation. So that's what he means about solving on the political level. I think the Armenians would understand this. The Armenians now have homelands, but for a while they were disenfranchised and the Turkish massacres could occur. If they have to deal with a country, it's a little different. And the Kurds are experiencing that now, and have experienced that for a long time. Nobody has given them anything. And I'm afraid that in the present configuration of forces in Iraq, they're going to end up in the short end of the stick again, because they're the weakest entity when it comes to Arabs, Turks, and Iranians. No one even knew Kurds existed before 5 years ago in this country. And yet they've been disenfranchised and everything else. And we who care for people who have underdogs or disenfranchised should really, in America, we should care about the Kurdish question. We shouldn't let the Iranians, the Turks, the other parts of Iraq overwhelm them. We did protect them after the first Gulf War, but only because we were trying to undermine Saddam. I don't think we really cared about the Kurds. Anyway, so this is the case, will inevitably be so, unless the question is solved on a political level. That's why he's speaking about political Zionism. These Jews are now carrying the seeds of anti-Semitism to England and have already introduced it into America. It's highly complex. So on. He speaks about commercial rivalry, inherited prejudice, religious intolerance. I consider the Jewish question neither a social nor a religious one, even though it sometimes takes these forms. It's a national question. And to solve it, we must first of all establish it as an international political problem to be discussed and settled by the civilized nations of the world in council. Well, that's what happened in the League of Nations after the First World War. And that's what's now happening in the UN, and you see how that works. I mean, the UN is like a joke. It's, if you were going to leave it to the so-called civilized nations in council to solve anything, you'd surely be on the way to destruction. So he is, I praised him, and now you say, you've praised him, now look at you're criticizing. You know, that's the way it goes. You know, nobody's perfect. I'm not perfect. He's not perfect. Nobody's perfect. You're not perfect. He's got his pluses and his minuses. But his achievements outweigh, because he's put this on the table, this question. We are a people. One people. Now, you see, no one really has said that previously. The Jews are a people. You know, you say, well, look, you're Americans now. What's your problem? I don't think the Jews in America have a particular problem more than any other group in America. I mean, if you're a Korean in America, you're of the Korean people. If you're a Japanese in America, you're of the Japanese people. If you're a Native American, you're of the Indian or Native American people. So we have room for these ethnic configurations within the American social structure. So America is fairly unique in that regard, but most of these countries in Europe saw themselves as peoples. So the Jews were outside of this structure. Anyway, he sees the Jews as a people. Originally the Jews were a people, not just a religion. And after the two wars against Rome, as we studied in this class, they lost their national territorial attachment. I don't think they lost their peoplehood. And that's what all the nations of Europe realized. They were not assimilating. Now, the Jews themselves, what about the Jews themselves? What do they think? Well, if you ask most Jews what they are, they won't say that they're a people. Most Jews mean Americans, oh, it's a religion. They don't, they've lost, I don't say they're confused. They've lost this understanding that Herzl vividly portrays. Now, you have to judge for yourself. Do you think the Jews are a religion or a people? We're not going to solve it in this class, but that's the question that he's asking. I think that in his world, at his time, in his social situation, he's correct. The Jews are a people, and therefore they should be, dealt with as a people. Hitler certainly dealt with them as a people. He didn't ask, did you believe? He didn't believe, are you a reform? Are you conservative? Are you a communist? Are you a socialist? Are you an atheist? That wasn't that was not even the question. He went to 2 or 3 generations back, even in converted people. So he understood that they were a people, or at least that's how he behaved, and those who were working with him. Anyway, so you'll have to decide about your view of Herzl. In native lands where we live, next paragraph, we have been decried as aliens, which is true. That's what we heard. We hear the Germans have said, the Russians say it. I think you'll see it in England even today if you go to England. I don't think you see it in America anymore that much because of the special situation. Now Europe is getting to have to realize that there are different peoples that are becoming Europeans. They're beginning to come out of the dark ages. A little late, but they're beginning to emerge. The majority decide who the alien is. This and in all else in relations between people is a matter of power. This is the majority. I think blacks in America can vouch for that. Anyway, he goes on to that. Goes on like that. But there's a break here. But in his conclusion, he says, I think we shall not be left in peace. All this would be fine. We could work out if we were left in peace. Time might, etc. But I think we shall not be left in peace. There's the prophetical of Herzl speaking. He doesn't think they're going to be left in peace to sort this out. He speaks about extermination. He doesn't see that as possible yet. But look, no nation, bottom of that page 209, has endured such struggles and sufferings. Jew baiting has merely winnowed out our weaklings, the strong among us, to finally return to their own whenever persecution breaks out. He's obviously been reading a little Nietzsche here, the will to power and stuff like that. Nietzsche is a very influential philosopher at the end of the 19th century, if you've read him. And, he speaks in a Nietzschean sense here to some extent. But anyway, what does he mean by Jew baiting, first of all? Jew baiting is like hep, that kind of thing. Mel Gibson is a Jew baiter. That's really what he is.
He's too subtle.
No, he's not too subtle. I think he wants the Jews to criticize. Yeah, he wants the. Pardon me, I missed it. He wants the Jews to criticize his movie so that it will get more publicity and sell more tickets, and people want to know what the fuss is all about. That's what Jew baiting is. If the worse he portrays them, then the more he knows they're going to react, and the more people are going to want to know, what's this all about, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then it's about our Lord, so it's got to be okay in the end. The passion of our Lord, what could be wrong with that? Nothing can be wrong with that, finally, except how it's portrayed, perhaps. And anyway, he's a classic one. And he says, and of course all the Jews jumped to the bait when that movie came out. They would have been much wiser to ignore it. As we said last time, Borat is a kind of Jewish Jew baiter. He's doing something of the same thing, but his is less, he can get away with it easily. Anyway, he says, that's fine. The Jew baiters are the ones who can't take it, can't take this. Let them go. Let them convert. Let them be gone. If they don't have the honor to stand up to this, here's the duelists from the fraternities in the German university town speaking, let the weaklings go. That's what they want. There are enough strong people who will return to their own and stand when the chips are down. And that's happened in Israel. You have to say that that's happened in Israel. I just had an interesting experience the other day where my sons, we had knew some people in Israel, and they were young and they played with their children. They were like 10, 9, 11, and And they thought these people were like wimps or something like that. And then we came back to California and lived here and so on. And one of the little boys who was really a mommy's boy and so on, I heard later on, you know, just recently that I had lost contact with these people, that he had been with my son in a cave situation. They'd been playing out in a lonely area outside the confines of Jerusalem, and some Arabs, shepherd or whatever, just sort of people looking for trouble, saw them and took them into a cave. And it was before the Palestinian thing got cute, so it wasn't a matter of people trying to just cut people's throats or something like that. They took them into a cave and they were going to do something, you know, try to maybe just torment them or whatever. They were little kids, you know, that they were laughing at, but they had taken them prisoner in a way. And my son said to the boy with him, come on, run now, when they weren't looking, you know. And the boy was so frightened. No, I can't, I'm too frightened, you know. He said, you have to. And he ran, and then he came back, and he went back for it because the boy couldn't move. He was incapacitated by fear. And he never forgot this story, my son had told him. And so that boy, when he grew up, I saw the pictures of him, now 6'1", very strapping boy, you know, and so on. Went to the Israeli army for 6 years, became a part of a paratroop commando unit, you know, dropped behind enemy lines and so on. Was in a unit that was decimated in warfare, where 3 of his buddies were killed and so on and so forth. And has been in the Israeli army for 6 years or something like that. And that's what a landed people can do. And when I told my son, he was a guy, he just couldn't believe it. He just he was like totally amazed. And it is amazing. It is amazing how something can happen, transform people like that. It's something, you know, even now when I tell it to you, I'm just so astonished to see such a thing. And he was someone you would never imagine this could happen, and then to stay extra time in the army, in a combat unit, and so on, looking at him at that point when he was 9 or 10 years old, you know. The world is a strange place. So that when the chips are down, he says, they will stand. My son would never have believed it in this particular case, but there it is. Even more than my son, I have to say. So anyway, as he goes on here, I have to hurry up a little bit. So this was most clearly apparent in the period immediately following the emancipation of the Jews. Those Jews who rose highest intellectually and materially lost their sense of unity with the people. And that's the criticism that Eisenman, everyone will make of Herzl, that he doesn't really represent the common people. And who's he talking about here? You know, the Mendelssohns, the descendants of Mendelssohns, the Heinrich Heines, the Karl Marxes, all these people who lost their sense of unity with the people. Where we get secure for a given period of time, we assimilate. But this is, he doesn't think this is, anyway. He doesn't think, he's not particularly enamored of that. Because all prejudices against us are still deeply ingrained in the folk ethos. He would have proof of this. He'd only listen to the people where they speak candidly and artlessly. Folk wisdom, folklore are both anti-Semitic. And that's interesting. He says that because I told you about Rabbi Kahana, who, that's what he used to say, as I told you. He was a Jewish extremist, of course. And he was killed by Arabs, ultimately in Brooklyn, at one of his speeches. He obviously didn't know how to defend himself. He couldn't defend everyone else, but he couldn't defend himself. But the point was that he used to say, if you want to know what people really think about Jews, and I told you this already, but I'll repeat it, just go into a bar. That was a good line for people. I'm not a sports bar, I'm talking about the old style bars where people just lie all over and get drunk. We don't have so many of those anymore, thank God. That's a wave of the last 150 years that seems to have been passing. I think they have a few still down in San Diego and places like that. And there's a few, I think that's an army town, San Diego. There's a few, if you go downtown Newport Beach and places, weird as it may seem, even in Huntington Beach downtown, you'll see a few. There's not too many bars around In any event, I think that probably is a pretty cheap way of putting it the way he put it. But he's saying what Herzl is saying, or he's taking off from Herzl. The Hungarian liberals who have legalized intermarriage have placed themselves in a thoroughly false position. Remember I told you about that movie Sunshine? That's about Hungarian liberals. And you should go to see that movie if you get a chance. I can't repeat the whole movie again, but that's another thing what he's talking about. That movie is a perfect illustration of what he's talking about. Those who wish the Jews to disappear through intermarriage, is what he's talking about, can hope to see it done in only one way. They must rise so high economically that old social prejudice against them are overcome. Well, that may or may not be true in America. But, you know, you had the country club situation in America where there were, but we also have the Afro-American situation in America, and now many other minorities. So it isn't just the Jews who have these problems in America. But the country club was a perfect bastion of this kind of thinking some years back, last 100 years in America. If you wanted to be a member of a country club, I never wanted to be a member of a country club, so it never bothered me, frankly. Why would I want to be a member of that country club? Oh, I can't imagine anything more horrendous. Who would want to be a member of someone's country club that just wanted to be among themselves? Let them be among themselves. Who wants to be a part of them? Anyway, so he's speaking about things in his own time. The power the Jews now possess at the bottom of that page evokes rage and indignation among the anti-Semites. We heard that out in Malibu the other day, but that's what Hitler was really ranting against too. It was something, he was enraged about something. In other words, next page, where Jews are for the moment secure, and so on, it will probably be passionately challenged by my co-religionists. They will not believe me until they are again visited by Jew baiting. The longer anti-Semitism lies dormant, the more violently it erupts. Well, again, in Germany, it's a case in point. If you look at those cartoons from the Hitler era, those are Jew baiting cartoons. The portrait of them, the way they portrayed them as vermin and everything. I don't know if you've seen the Nazi propaganda movies, and it's something, you know, like, you just can't believe that people would portray anything like that. And so he says the longer it's dormant, the worse it comes up. And it looks like he understands the thing about human nature, at least in Europe, and I don't think America is like that. So he thinks that a lot of Jews will oppose him on this, which in fact they did. The ones who wanted to assimilate felt threatened by Herzl's presentation of the history. Anyway, look, let's deal with this issue of Jews who will feel frightened by what I'm proposing. I wish from the beginning in the middle of that page to deal with any mistaken ideas that might arise. In this case, the fear that if the present plan is realized, it could in any way damage property and interests now held by Jews in countries where they're thriving, where they're doing okay, and so. And that's what happened in England when the Balfour Declaration came. The English Jews opposed it. The Balfour Declaration we will discuss presently is issued in the midst of the First World War, which is 20 years after what we're writing. So, you know, it seems like a light years away, but it's just 20 years later. It's 1917, and this is 1897 or so. So that's just 20 years. And the English Jews are the first ones who complain about it. Then the Arabs complain about it. And then a more serious objection is I'm giving aid and comfort to the anti-Semites when I say we are a people, one people. Or that I'm hindering assimilation. You see how totally opposed to Reform Judaism he is. And yet he's the epitome of a Reformed Jew. He's so Reformed that Judaism means almost nothing to him. He's reformed it out of existence. It's only nationality now for him. So the very thing that the Reformed Jews have thrown in the wastebasket is the very thing that he embraces. Which is the point I keep making, but I think it's really well made. So look here, folks. He says here, However much I may esteem personality, powerful individual personality and statesmen, inventors, artists, philosophers, leaders, as well as the collective personality of a historic group of human beings which we designate nations, however much I esteem personality, I do not mourn its decline. Whoever can, will, and must perish, let him perish. Look at him, he's tough, right? Look, if you don't want to be part of this thing, don't, but just don't stand in the way of the rest of us who want to be part of it. Just get out of the way. You want to sit there and do nothing and, you know, take your chances or be eaten up by this kind of thing? Okay, fine, then do. He's really, he puts it more eloquently than I do. But the distinctive nationality of the Jews neither can, will, nor must perish. Well, that's absolutely true. It has not perished. It's not, I don't think it's going to perish. Whatever we're witnessing today. I mean, the world may perish, but, and everyone with it, but so long as the world exists, that distinctive nationality is not going to perish. And you can do what you like. You can, you know, you can eradicate 6 million, you can nuke Israel, you can do whatever you want, but it's not going to happen in the end. At least he says it, and if you don't want to be part of this, he says, don't. You know, just stand out of the way. See, here's his honor thing. It need not that as a descendant of countless Jews refuse to despair. This is what I keep emphasizing in this course here, about honor and so on. I'm trying once more to prove in this pamphlet. Whole branches of Jewry may wither and fall away, but the tree lives on. The whole thing does not, you see, hence if the French Jews protest against my scheme, because they're already assimilated, and my parents and their parents would have protested against it. No, we don't want that, you know. My mother would have been the first to protest against such a scheme. My answer is simple. This doesn't concern you at all. Don't worry about it. Just carry on with your life. Don't just get out of the way. They are Israelite Frenchmen. Okay, fine, splendid. Be Israelite Frenchmen. Be Frenchmen of the Mosaic persuasion, as it was put earlier in the Napoleonic answers to in the Great Sanhedrin discussions. This is a private affair for Jews alone, those who feel that they are Jewish. That's it. You other ones, you don't want to be part of it? Don't. Now, you say, you know, this is a modern Jewish thought class. Well, you know, I think we're at the root of modern Jewish thought here. That's why I do this in these classes. I think this is a great collection of pieces. So, he knows about Darwin. He speaks about Darwin in the next paragraph. The next paragraph after that, the departure of the dedicated Jews would be even more to the advantage of the assimilated ones. You know, you'd be free of this problem. You could then assimilate as much as you wanted. Just let the ones who are dedicated go. They would be freed of the disquieting, unpredictable, and inescapable competition of Jewish proletariat driven by poverty and political pressure from place to place, from land to land. You know, the assimilated Jews in America and New York, when the masses came from Russia and Eastern Europe, they were like, oh my God, look at this mass of, you know, horrifying looking people. And it still exists in Jewish society today. The German, Central European, more intellectual, sophisticated Jews looking down on the Russian sort of mass of Jews that came. You know, it happens in all countries when that happens. So, further along down. This is a secret grievance of the assimilated, which finds expression in their philanthropic undertakings. They really want to get rid of these people. See, a lot of assimilated Jews were giving money to settle Jews somewhere, but usually somewhere else. Remove the paupers as quickly and as far away as possible, and thus many an apparent friend of the Jews turns out on closer examination to be no more than an anti-Semite of Jewish origin in philanthropist clothing. He's really tough. He's kind of pretty nasty. No wonder the philanthropist didn't want to help him. You know, these people who are doing all this philanthropy at that time, settling Jews in Argentina and other places like that. There's a fellow named Baron Hirsch who was doing that. He says, you know, that's nice, but that is not what we're about. Next page. No human being is wealthy or powerful enough to transplant a people from one place or residence to another. In other words, rich philanthropists, other things can't do it. Only an idea can do it. It's very romantic, but I think very insightful. It's an idea that moves people. That's what moves large masses, numbers of people, an idea. The state idea has that kind of power. The Jews have dreamed their princely dream throughout the long night of their history, next year in Jerusalem. The very prayer that the reformers deleted. It's now a matter of showing that vague dream. They do it at the Passover Seder's, they drink and they say, next year in Jerusalem. Can be transformed to a clear and glowing idea. The unthinking, for example, might imagine the Exodus would have to take its away from civilization to the desert. That's not true. We don't have to go from high civilization to nothing. It will be carried out particularly hard in the framework of civilization. And you know, now Israel is one of the most advanced Silicon Valley type countries in the world. And their economy is thriving even in this negative situation. And all the Arab lands around them, you know, okay, they have all the oil, but the average citizens are in penury. And you see, it's civilization that brings economic well-being and the ability to thrive. Look, we shall not revert to a lower stage. We shall go up to a higher one. We shall not dwell in mud huts. We shall build new, more beautiful modern houses and possess them in safety. Unfortunately, the world has not allowed that to totally happen, but where the Israelis have been able to work it there in a free manner, it does happen, and it benefits the surrounding populations, the Arabs too. And the worst thing that happened to the state of Israel was in the wake of the well, even before that, in the wake of the gas crisis and the Carter initiatives to force a peace process on them, and then the Bush initiatives after the first Gulf War to further force that peace process on them. All that occurred because of the peace process was to divide the Jews and the Arabs totally, whereas before I was there, I know they were all thriving together and everyone was actually benefiting and rather enjoying the situation. It was only the Arabs who were overseas who were envious and jealous. And what the Bush peace process brought in was to bring all the Arabs from overseas who were, you know, agitating and so on in Tunis and Lebanon and these other places back into Palestine and arm them and then polarize the whole place with suicide bombings. And not only arm them, but give them such arms that they could then be far more destructive than anything previously. So the peace process just brought more war. And that's one of the problems of crying peace. I mean, you can say peace is easy to cry. Everyone wants peace. I'm for peace, I'm for peace. Well, you're just a wonderful person. But because you're for peace doesn't mean you're going to get it. And sometimes, you know, you have to have strength to get peace. This is what we're seeing in the Middle East in our policy. Oh, all the people want peace. We'll withdraw, we'll have peace. No, you won't have peace. You won't have peace. Doesn't mean you have to dominate anybody. But peace is something that comes through a certain amount of strength and resolution and so on. In any case, the point is that the peace process brought a terrible, deterioration in the lives of everybody in Israel, not just the Jews and what they were trying to achieve, but the Arabs too have just, suffered miserably as a result of bringing all these thugs in from other countries and arming them. And we're not finished with the thugs. The armed thugs in the Middle East are in the ascendancy. Anyway, he says that the Jews, we could have a very modern, beautiful civilization, and that's true. That's what was developing. I saw that developing in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. We are not going to lose our acquisitions. We shall surrender our well-earned rights for better ones. We relinquish none of our cherished customs. He's writing this to Jews, mind you. We shall find them again. We shall not leave our old home until the new one is available. This is another interesting point now. we should have advanced parties who go first. People shouldn't leave a home for nothing. And the new one has to be available. That's what he means by political Zionism. There must be a clear charter here that is granted in some manner to them. And this is what didn't occur. And I think this is the root cause of not really following Herzl's program and his premature death, the tragedy of it, not the root cause of many of the problems. Those only will depart who are sure thereby to improve their condition. The people who are suffering the most desperate will go first. And then the poor. Next, the well-to-do, and let the wealthy, if they want, come last or don't come at all. Those who go first will raise themselves to a higher grade on a level with that whose representatives will shortly follow. The Exodus will thus, at the same time, be an ascent in class. He's such an optimist. I guess he is a bit of a utopian. Now, and the Christians will benefit because positions will be relinquished by Jews. That's good for them too. 2:14. Nor will the exodus of Jews in any way be a flight. No. It'll be a well-regulated movement. This is what the other Zionists will see at the Zionist Congresses will object to. They'll say, Herzl had Western ideas, modern ideas. It wasn't Jewish enough, Weitzman will say. We have to have the old Jewish way of doing things, the ghetto way. They were frightened by Herzl. And yet I think his vision, if it had been, carried out in the way he foresaw it, would have been even more successful than we have presently seen it be. And again, his premature death is a sad. There's so many deaths that occur that are sad. Lincoln, people like Herzl, who died prematurely, Teddy Roosevelt, things like that are really unfortunate for the country, for the people that they're involved in. It will be a well-regulated movement under the constant check of public opinion. The movement will not only be inaugurated in absolute accordance with law, it will be lawful, but it can no wise be carried out without friendly cooperation of the interested governments who will derive substantial benefits from it. That's why he starts traveling. That's why he goes to the German Kaiser. That's why he goes to England and speaks to the government. That's why he goes to the Turkish Sultan, to explain to them how it would be in their benefit to back this idea. Not as a result of holocausts, but to back it because of the positive benefits that it would bring. To see the ideas carried out responsibly, vigorously, that kind of guarantee is required, which can be provided by the kind of corporate body with legal terminology called a moral or legal person. So it's very modern. He wants a company, a moral person, to deal with all but property rights. I propose to establish the Society of the Jews as a legal person, a Jewish company, as he calls it. I guess this is what Hitler thinks is the protocols of the elders of Zion. All he wants to do is get in Israel, you wouldn't know this, but I've been there and I've experienced it and so on. This company exists. You can go in downtown Los Angeles and look it up in the phone book. It's called the Jewish Agency. It's an agency for the settlement of Jews in now Israel, in those days in Palestine, to regulate, to order, to oversee, to finance, and so on. And that still exists. Its head offices are in Jerusalem. It's not a very powerful organization anymore. The Israel government has far exceeded it, but it's this one function it has to oversee and try to help, like they do the immigration of Jews from Ethiopia now. Even though the rabbis question the authenticity of the Jewish character of the Jews in Ethiopia, the Jewish Agency oversees and helps bring them to Israel. And today, if you go to Israel, you'll see Ethiopian Jews everywhere. from Russia or places like that is still operating. There's 1 million Russian Jews have come to Israel since the Iron Curtain fell. That's a huge number. I'm not sure they're so happy there. They've taken a huge downward spiral in economic well-being and status, because the Israelis are not very welcome in terms of relinquishing any of their benefits to newcomers. But this agency does still operate in those situations. Only an impostor or a madman would even pretend to undertake a monumental task of this on his own. Further down, if I want to replace an old building with a new one, I must demolish it before I construct. Anyway, we need to divide this thing into 3 sections: the Jewish company, local groups, and the Society of the Jews. Anyway, he goes in to explain how he's going to do it. The society will be constructed first. So he's very practical. Not only is he not utopian and far-seeing, he is far-seeing, but he's also very practical. He wants to get to work and do it. Anyway, although I speak here in terms of reason, I'm well aware that reason alone will not suffice. Long-term prisoners do not willingly quit their cells. What did Marx say in the Communist Manifesto? Workers of the world, throw off your chains or something like that. You have only, yourselves to blame, or et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Well, I think he's well aware of all these previous pamphleteering that has gone on. We shall see whether the youth, which is more ripe, will be ready for this. And they will bring the aged behind them, bearing them on powerful arms, transforming rationality into enthusiasm. Well, we hope that happened. I'm not sure if it did. Okay, the Jewish question is the next part. Even the equality that was granted, he says, is now in his own days almost a dead letter. People go around and say, don't buy from the Jews. And of course, in the Nazi period, they even labeled them, put yellow stars on them, put yellow stars on their business operations, smash things and so on. So, civilized Europe, as he said, most of this equality was a dead letter, and he goes into a few examples. I'm not trying to arouse sympathy. That's nonsense to try to get sympathy from people. And it's as futile as it is dishonorable. There it is again, dishonorable. It's not honorable. Herzl has dignity and honor. That means a lot to him. He's not trying to, ingratiate himself. Everywhere, next page, one hears the cry, particularly in Berlin, sort of Judenraus. We hear it actually in the movies in Hollywood too. Out, out, out to the Jews. Can we hope for better days? I say we cannot hope for this current to shift. That's amazing. 1897, he knows it's not only not going to shift, it's going to get worse. I don't know how he knows it. This guy is a visionary, obviously, and a genius. I mean, I'm sure if I were living in 1897, I wouldn't have been able to see what was going to happen in 1937. Here's how he explains it though. The common people, you see, the nations in whose midst Jews live are covertly or openly anti-Semitic. The common people have not, and indeed cannot have, any comprehension of history. They do not know that the sins of the Middle Ages are now being visited on the nations of Europe. We are what the ghetto made us. And we're not really ghetto people. I told you the example of the boy I just described to you. No, the environment does most of the work. People have an idea of the Jew, the wandering Jew, shuffling, or whatever he appears like to them. We are what the ghetto made her, so the sins come back and are visited on the modern world. We are again being forced into money lending, which gets people to hate us, namely stock exchanges, and you've heard all that the Jews control the stock exchanges of the world. At the same time, and this is the point I was telling you about, we continue to produce an abundance of mediocre intellectuals who find no outlet and thus endanger our social position as much as any increasing wealth does. Educated Jews without means are now rapidly becoming socialists, which are bringing the disapprobation of the, social classes, the upper classes of Europe on them. So it's going to make things worse. Thus, we stand in the most this struggle between the classes that he's well aware of, Marxist ideal and so on, is even more acute for us because we stand in the most exposed position in both the capitalist and the socialist camps. We have our feet in both, and again, Mein Kampf and works like that, we're not slow to see that. So look, there's the first time that he mentioned something else which shows his foresight. We have an abundance of mediocre intellectuals that bring upon us ultimately a lot of hatred. He wants to change that. He wants to put these intellectuals to work. Or take a break and come back in 10 minutes. And we'll finish up Herzl. You say, well, I could have read that all myself. Yeah, you could have, but I don't think you would have done it well anyway. So to me, it's worth taking the time. Next time, I thought we would get to Ahad and these other people today. I hope that we can finish up Herzl and get to a few of them. But next time we're going to focus on Ahad and Weitzman. And then the last class, I think that's the last class, is it after that? We're going to do Jabotinsky and some of the others. And I think that should get us through the whole thing. You will then be a very sophisticated Jewish intellectual. The only thing is that there's hardly any Jews in the room. So it's not going to help you much.